For nearly 2,000 years it stood in silence, a place whispered about in prayers, studied in scriptures, and visited by millions. The tomb believed to have held the body of Jesus Christ, sealed by stone, cloaked in mystery, and protected by tradition. Generations have walked its shadowed path, hoping for a glimpse of the divine, never imagining that one day it would be opened, not by force, not by scandal, but by permission. And what they found inside didn't just raise questions. It shook the world. It all started with a letter, yellowed with age, edges curled like forgotten parchment from another time. Delivered to an old monastery in Jerusalem, it was addressed simply to the keeper. No one had used that title in over a century. Inside, the words were written in a hurried hand. The time has come. The tomb must be opened. There was no signature, no return address. Just those chilling words and an ancient symbol, one that hadn't been seen since the time of the Crusades. At first, the letter was dismissed. Prank, perhaps, or the ramblings of a conspiracy theorist. But when it was shown to Father Elias, a humble priest and historian who had lived in the monastery for over 30 years, his face went pale. He didn't speak for several minutes, only stared at the symbol. Later, he quietly confessed to Brother Michael that he had seen it once before, on a scroll locked away in the Vatican archives, a scroll he wasn't even supposed to touch. 3 days later, an unexpected visitor arrived at the monastery. Dr. Layla Morgan, a world-renowned archaeologist and expert in ancient Middle Eastern history, had received a strange email that had simply read, "It's time. Come to Jerusalem. Ask for the keeper." It was unsigned. She assumed it was a hoax, but the pull was too strong. Something told her this was different. And when she met Father Elias, the look in his eyes confirmed it. He too felt it, that heavy, unshakable feeling that history was about to change. As news of the planned opening began to spread quietly through academic circles, the reactions were mixed. Some scholars were skeptical. Others were angry, calling it disrespectful, even dangerous. But there was no stopping it now. Permission had been granted by religious leaders after a long and quiet discussion behind closed doors. For the first time in centuries, the church had agreed. The tomb would be opened, not for treasure, not for glory, but for truth. Inside the ancient church of the Holy Sepulchre, the air felt different that night. Still and heavy, as if time itself was holding its breath. Layla stood at the edge of the stone chamber, her flashlight trembling in her hand. Father Elias whispered a prayer beside her, his fingers clutching a wooden cross that had belonged to his grandfather. A small team of scientists and preservation experts waited silently, each one aware of the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a dig. This was sacred ground. The stone slab covering the entrance was older than anyone expected. Carbon dating later confirmed it had been untouched for over 1,900 years. It took over 12 hours of careful work to lift it, layer by layer, without damaging the surrounding structure. But as the last layer was removed, a gust of strangely warm air rushed out from the tomb, startling everyone. Didn't feel like decay. Felt slave. What they saw next wasn't recorded in the initial report. In fact, several parts of the findings were left out entirely from the public release. What was shared with the world was that they found artifacts, some bones, a piece of cloth with ancient bloodstains. But what was left out, what was only whispered about behind locked doors, was the object at the center of the tomb, something no one could explain. Layla was the first to see it clearly. A stone tablet, smoother than anything from that time period, yet covered in symbols older than Hebrew or Greek. Symbols that seemed to glow faintly, even in the darkness. She reached out to touch it, but Father Elias stopped her. "It's not meant to be touched," he whispered. "Not yet." There was also the journal, bound in leather, pages brittle with age. It was found tucked into a crevice in the back wall, behind what appeared to be a false stone. No one had ever noticed it before, not even during restorations over the centuries. The writing inside was a mix of languages, some Latin, some Aramaic, and a few symbols no one recognized. But what sent chills down Layla's spine were the final words on the last page, hastily scribbled as if written in a hurry. He is not here. He walked again. And where he walks, shadows follow. The next morning, one of the scientists on the team resigned abruptly. He didn't give a reason. He didn't even pack his things. He simply walked out of the church, left his equipment behind, and flew home without a word. Another team member started having vivid dreams, of a desert, a voice calling her name, and an old man with eyes that saw through time. None of it made sense, and yet everything about it felt connected. Back in Rome, a sealed letter arrived at the Vatican. Had no return address, just the symbol. The same one that had been on the original letter to the monastery. Inside was a photograph. Grainy, black and white, clearly old. It showed a man standing near the entrance of the tomb. He wore robes, sandals, and his face. His face was blurry, almost deliberately, but something about him felt unmistakable. He held a staff in one hand and seemed to be looking directly at the camera. At the bottom of the photo were the words, "He will return when the door is opened." Since that day, rumors have spread. Quiet murmurs of strange occurrences around the church. Pilgrims reporting feelings of overwhelming peace or sudden fear. Lights flickering. Voices in the stillness. And through it all, the church has remained silent, issuing only one statement. The tomb was opened. What was found belongs to history, faith, and mystery. But Layla knows it isn't over. In her private journal, she wrote something she hasn't shared with anyone yet. Not even Father Elias. On the third night after the tomb was opened, she returned alone. She needed one more look, just to make sure it was real. And when she stood at the edge of the stone chamber, flashlight in hand, she swore she saw it again, the faint glow from the tablet. And a shadow that moved. Without making a sound. She hasn't slept since. And now she's ready to tell her story. Because what they found inside Jesus' tomb was never meant to stay hidden. It wasn't just history. It was a message. One that the world was never supposed to see. Till now. But what does it mean? And more importantly, who, or what, opened the tomb first? Stay with us. What comes next will change everything. Layla hadn't told anyone about the shadow. Not because she was scared, though deep down she was. But because something told her that if she spoke it aloud, it would make it real. And whatever it was, she wasn't ready to face it. The official report she submitted the next morning spoke only of the artifacts, the preservation conditions, and vague references to unusual findings. No mention of the tablet. No mention of the warmth in the air. And definitely no mention of the figure she thought she saw standing at the far end of the tomb, just beyond the reach of her light. She'd returned to her hotel in a daze, her thoughts spinning like pages torn from a book caught in the wind. Everything about the tomb defied logic. As a scientist, she had trained her mind to look for patterns, facts, evidence. But this was different. There were things down there that didn't belong in any historical period. Materials too advanced, languages that had no root. And that tablet. It still pulsed in her mind like a heartbeat. Back at the monastery, Father Elias wasn't doing much better. He sat in the chapel long after the others had gone to bed, staring at the flickering candlelight with tired eyes. He held the old cross between his fingers, turning it slowly. He'd seen miracles before. He'd read the ancient texts, prayed through storms of doubt. But this wasn't a miracle. Felt more like a warning. The symbols on the tablet weren't just decorative. They matched a set of markings he'd seen once, long ago, on a hidden wall deep beneath a forgotten chapel in southern France. At the time, he hadn't understood what they meant. Now he wasn't sure he wanted to. In the following days, the team agreed to keep the details private. For now, there was too much they didn't understand, and the risk of public hysteria was too great. But someone didn't agree. 3 days after the tomb was sealed again, a blurry photo began circulating online. It showed a close-up of part of the tablet, the glowing symbols unmistakable. Within hours, conspiracy forums lit up with theories. Ancient technology, alien influence, lost prophecies. Some even claimed it proved time travel. Most of it was nonsense, but the buzz grew fast. Too fast. Layla knew the leak hadn't come from her. She'd been careful. But someone on the team had talked, or worse, someone had been watching them the entire time. She received a call that evening from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was low, calm, and completely unfamiliar. "Don't speak," the man said. "You're being followed. Trust no one. Not even your team." The call ended before she could reply. That night, as she looked out the window of her hotel room, she noticed something that made her stomach turn cold. Across the street, parked under a broken streetlight, was a black sedan. It had been there the night before too. Same car. Same spot. But this time, she could see the silhouette of someone sitting inside. Motionless. She pulled the curtains closed. Meanwhile in Rome, strange things were happening behind closed doors. A retired bishop, who had once served on a secret theological commission, was found unconscious in his home. No signs of forced entry. No injuries. Just a note left beside him, written in Latin. Translated it read, "The door was opened. But not by you." The Vatican issued no statement. Back in Jerusalem, Brother Michael discovered something odd while organizing the church's archives. A journal, dusty, leather-bound, its pages fragile with time, was tucked inside a hollow space behind a row of crumbling bricks. The cover was unmarked, but inside were detailed entries from a monk named Thomas, written over 800 years ago. His writings described visions he claimed were sent by an angel. In them, he saw a future where the tomb would open, and with it, a light unlike any the world had ever known. But the visions weren't all peaceful. He also wrote of a darkness, something ancient, patient, and angry. Something that had been waiting for the tomb to open again. He called it the Watcher in the Dust. Layla spent the next day at the local museum archives, hoping to trace the origins of the strange symbols on the tablet. She sifted through old maps, ancient scrolls, and even some black and white photographs from the early 1900s. One photograph caught her attention. It showed a group of explorers standing at the entrance of a deep cave, somewhere in the Judean desert. But in the background, partially hidden by rock, was a carving, one of the same symbols that now haunted her dreams. Something clicked. The symbols weren't just random. They were part of a pattern, one that stretched across continents and centuries. She cross-referenced them with other sites around the world. Petra, Delphi, Göbekli Tepe. The same markings appeared in all of them. But why? And what did they mean? She emailed her findings to Father Elias, who confirmed what she feared. These symbols weren't just archaeological. They were theological. Hidden in ancient apocryphal texts were vague references to the language of the Watchers. Not angels, not demons, but something in between. Beings that were said to have existed before man, silent observers of history, whose purpose was never clearly understood. And according to one passage, the last time this language had been spoken aloud, a city vanished without a trace. Layla didn't sleep that night. The next morning, she received a message slipped under her hotel door. It wasn't typed. It wasn't even written with ink. The words looked etched, burned into the paper somehow. "He is not here. He walks again. Follow the dust." It was unsigned. Across town, another member of the excavation team, Professor Amir Haddad, a geologist, was found in his apartment, muttering to himself in a language no one recognized. He hadn't slept in 2 days. His neighbors said he'd been pacing all night, scribbling symbols onto his walls. The authorities were called. He was taken in for psychiatric evaluation, and while being admitted, he whispered to the nurse, "It's not a tomb. It's a gate." Layla flew home the next day. But even in her quiet apartment thousands of miles away, she didn't feel safe. She locked her doors, pulled her curtains, and kept the lights on. She started having dreams. Not nightmares, just strange, vivid scenes. Desert. A figure in robes. A whisper carried by the wind. Always the same phrase. The dust remembers. She started recording everything. Notebooks, voice memos, even video logs. She didn't know what was coming, but she could feel it. Something had been set in motion. Something old. And maybe something holy. But holiness doesn't always come in peace. And somewhere out there, across oceans, across centuries, the tablet still pulsed. Waiting. Watching. Remembering. The door had been opened. And now, it would never close. 3 weeks passed. But Layla still couldn't return to her old routine. Something inside her had changed. The world felt heavier, like it was holding its breath. She kept going over the same pieces in her mind. The tomb, the tablet, the whispers, the shadow she saw that night. And always, always, those words burned into her thoughts. He is not here. He walks again. Meanwhile, Father Elias received an unexpected visitor at the monastery. A woman named Miriam, claiming to be a researcher from a small theological institute in Greece, arrived with an old satchel and a look in her eyes that told him she already knew more than she should. She asked for 15 minutes of his time. He gave her 2 hours. During that time, she laid out maps, texts, and old photographs, many of which were marked with the same glowing symbols they had seen on the tablet. But it wasn't just research she brought with her. She had a piece of the same stone. It was chipped, rough at the edges, and small enough to fit in her palm, but unmistakable. That same smooth, almost unnatural surface, and just enough of the symbol to be sure. I found it in a cave, she said, on Mount Athos. Hidden in the wall behind an abandoned chapel. There was no reason for it to be there. No record of it. But it matches your tablet, doesn't it? Father Elias could only nod. It was real. And if there was a piece of it in Greece, how many others were scattered around the world? In London, a retired journalist named Samuel Kearns was working late in his dusty home office when he stumbled across a file from 1993 labeled, Jericho Dust. He'd completely forgotten about it. Inside were notes from an interview he'd conducted with an elderly woman who claimed to have witnessed something strange in the ruins near Jericho. An underground chamber, symbols glowing on the walls, and a man in white robes who spoke in a voice like thunder underwater. The story had never been published. No one had believed her. But now it didn't sound so crazy. Samuel tracked down the woman's family. She had passed away years ago, but her granddaughter still had the original drawings. When he saw them, his hands started to shake. The same symbols, the same pattern. And in the corner of the last drawing was a small inscription. When the dust rises, the veil will fall. Elsewhere, in the deserts of Jordan, a team of amateur cave explorers posted a video online claiming to have found a chamber with strange markings. The video didn't gain much attention until someone noticed what appeared to be a carving of a man with a staff and blurred facial features, just like the photograph found in Rome. The video was taken down within hours. The account was deleted. And no one has heard from the explorers since. Layla saw the video before it vanished. She watched it 5 times, studying every frame. There was no doubt in her mind. Whatever they found was connected. But why were these things buried all over the world? And who had left them? One night she got a message on her private line. Voice-only call. You opened something, the voice said. Something that was meant to remain sealed. Now they're waking up. Layla asked. Who's waking up? The voice didn't answer. Just silence. And then a single word whispered before the call ended. Watchers. That same week, Father Elias received another letter. This one was handwritten and sealed with a symbol he hadn't seen in decades. The mark of the shepherds, an ancient religious order believed to have vanished centuries ago. Inside, the letter warned of the first of 3 signs. It described a natural event that would not feel natural. When the sky turns to dust and the birds lose their way, the second seal will tremble. Elias didn't know what to make of it. But that night, the air outside the monastery filled with a strange, coppery scent. The next morning, hundreds of birds were found circling the church tower, confused, panicked, as if something in the world had shifted. Subplots began to intertwine like roots beneath old soil. In a hospital in Istanbul, a young boy named Arman suddenly began speaking in fluent Aramaic, despite never having been exposed to it. His parents said he'd been drawing the same symbols on his bedsheets every night in his sleep. A visiting priest heard the boy utter a phrase no child should know. "The stone has cracked. The breath of the old one rises." Doctors dismissed it as a mental episode. But the boy's voice, it wasn't his own. Not really. Layla, desperate for answers, reached out to an old friend, Professor David Roshan, a linguistic anthropologist who had once helped decode texts from Qumran. She sent him high-resolution images of the tablet. Within a day, he called her back, sounding more shaken than she had ever heard him. "This isn't just a language," he said. "It's a warning system. Layered message. Almost like a lock. But the outer layer has already been triggered. I think we opened something we don't fully understand. And it's not just historical. It's active." She didn't want to ask the next question. But she did. What happens when the rest of it unlocks? His silence was all she needed to hear. Now, back in Jerusalem, whispers were growing among the monks. Some claimed to have seen figures in the hallway at night, shadows that didn't move with the light. Others heard voices during prayer, not angry or evil. Just old, tired, watching. Father Elias stayed up every night, praying in the chapel. The cross in his hand felt heavier now, like it knew something he didn't. He started reading again from the Book of Enoch, a text long excluded from common scripture. The passages about the Watchers, the fallen ones, stood out now with a new clarity. They had been imprisoned, sealed away by divine will. But the seals, they were not permanent. They were time-locked. And the tomb, with its strange warmth and unnatural stone, may have been one of the first. Layla booked another flight to Jerusalem. She couldn't stay away. The dream had returned, louder now, more vivid. The robed figure stood at the top of a mountain, holding the tablet above his head. The wind howled around him, carrying a voice she couldn't quite understand. But every night the final image was the same, the sky cracking open like shattered glass, and a blinding light pouring through. She knew the next part was coming, the second sign. And she wasn't ready. None of them were. Layla stood at the edge of the Mount of Olives just before sunrise, the city of Jerusalem still quiet beneath her. The sky was an eerie shade of gray, thick with dust that hadn't been forecasted. She felt it again, that hum in the air. The same sensation she had felt inside the tomb. It was faint, but constant, like the earth itself was holding a secret just beneath its surface. She had returned to the city because the signs were lining up too perfectly. The first seal had opened, whatever that truly meant, and now subtle warnings were unfolding everywhere. Crops in several parts of the Middle East had withered overnight with no logical explanation. A flash of light had been reported in the desert near Petra, captured briefly by a weather satellite, then dismissed as a solar reflection. And in a remote village near the Sea of Galilee, a man claimed to have heard voices singing in a language that hadn't been spoken for thousands of years. No one believed him until he drew the symbols in the sand. Layla took out her notebook and flipped to the page where she had sketched the tablet's carvings. She compared them to a recent satellite photo Father Elias had sent her from northern Syria. Etched into a dry riverbed, faint but visible, was the same spiral symbol found in the tomb. It was massive. There was no way it had formed naturally. And it hadn't been there 6 days ago. Something was moving beneath all of this, an ancient thread pulling pieces together across geography and time. The second seal hadn't opened yet. But it was close. Meanwhile, in the dim, candlelit corners of the monastery, Brother Michael grew increasingly restless. He had always been grounded in his faith, steady and unshaken. But now he walked with eyes that no longer saw the world the same way. He spoke less, listened more, and had started copying strange verses from old forbidden scrolls. Father Elias noticed the change but didn't question it. He felt it too. The feeling that something older than belief itself was slowly waking up. In the heart of the old city, deep within a hidden library beneath a synagogue, a historian named Avi Levinson made a shocking discovery. He had been translating fragments of parchment found in a private collection, documents believed to be forgeries. But one fragment, brittle and yellowed, referenced an ancient covenant not written in Hebrew, Greek, or Latin, but something much older. The translation was incomplete, but 3 words kept repeating. Return. Avi sent a photo of the fragment to Layla. When she saw it, her heart skipped. It matched the phrase spoken by the child in Istanbul. She barely had time to process it when she received a call from Professor Roshan. His voice trembled with urgency. Layla, I found the next layer of the tablet's message. It's a countdown. She went cold. A countdown to what? I don't know exactly. But there's a sequence. A shift. It's like a clock buried inside the stone. And if my math is right, he paused, the next phase begins in 72 hours. As that clock ticked down, weather anomalies spread across the globe. In the Sinai Peninsula, a shepherd reported a wall of wind rising suddenly in the shape of a spiral, only to vanish seconds later. In Greece, the sea had receded briefly, revealing old stones marked with carvings, before returning violently, dragging sand and debris inland as if reclaiming something. Even in New York, skies turned an unnatural hue for nearly 5 minutes, while birds flew in perfect circles above Central Park. None of it made sense. But people were starting to notice. Social media buzzed with videos, theories, and fear. Words like Jesus' tomb, ancient prophecy, and the Watchers trended across platforms. Official sources gave no answers, only vague reassurances. But Layla and Father Elias knew. The signs weren't random. They were aligned. Back at the church in Jerusalem, the atmosphere had changed. Tourists no longer came in the same numbers. Locals whispered about strange dreams, about visions of fire and voices calling from underground. And then came the fog, thick and white, creeping through the alleyways in the early morning. It didn't smell like smoke or mist. It smelled metallic, like old coins or blood in the air. That evening, Layla met with Father Elias one last time before heading back to the excavation site. The tomb had been sealed again after their discovery, but she had convinced the local authorities to let her visit one more time, under the pretense of research. But in truth she needed answers. She had to see it again. You don't have to go alone, Elias said quietly. I know, she replied. But I think it wants me to. That night, she returned to the site with 2 local guards. The air was heavier than before. As they descended into the tomb, the walls seemed closer, the silence more complete. Her flashlight flickered once, twice, then held steady. The tablet was still there, resting on the stone slab where they had first uncovered it. But it was no longer glowing. Instead, it was vibrating. The surface pulsed with a soft rhythm, as if it had a heartbeat of its own. And for a moment the silence broke, not with sound but with sensation. A pressure inside her chest, like someone or something was looking directly into her. One of the guards shifted uneasily. We should go, he said. But she stepped forward. She reached out slowly, hand hovering just above the stone. And then, without touching it, the tablet lit up again. The light wasn't gold this time. It was deep red, warm and strange, flickering like fire behind stained glass. The symbols moved. Not rotated, moved. As if alive. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed from somewhere beneath the ground. Dust fell from the ceiling. The guards called her name, but she couldn't move. Her eyes locked on the final symbol, one that hadn't been visible before. It looked like an eye, surrounded by flame. Then a whisper, clear as speech, though no one spoke. He walks again. The lights in the tomb went out. And far above, across the city, bells rang without hands to strike them. The bells echoed through the still night air like a warning, ringing out from churches that hadn't heard a sound in years. People across Jerusalem stopped in their tracks. Some stepped outside, confused and unsettled, as if they all felt something shift under their feet at once. In the old city, tourists and locals alike turned their heads toward the sky, watching as clouds curled unnaturally, pulsing with dull flashes of red light that didn't come from lightning. Inside the tomb, Layla opened her eyes. Everything was dark, silent. The warmth from the stone had vanished, replaced with a deep, unnatural chill. She could still feel the pressure in her chest, but it had changed, heavier now. Almost like something had entered her. She reached for her flashlight, hands trembling, and flicked it on. The guards were gone. She called out for them, her voice thin and uncertain in the thick silence. No answer. Only the sound of dripping water somewhere in the distance. The tunnel suddenly felt unfamiliar, like the walls had shifted. She tried to retrace her steps, but the way back looked wrong. It wasn't just dark, it was different. New carvings lined the sides of the corridor. Fresh ones. Symbols she hadn't seen before, glowing softly with the same deep red from the tablet. Back at the monastery, Father Elias stood before a room full of scrolls and old texts. He had begun connecting pieces he never thought he would use again. Passages from the Book of Enoch, fragments from the Dead Sea Scrolls, obscure warnings from apocryphal writings. It all seemed like superstition before, metaphor at best. But not anymore. One passage kept returning to him in his thoughts. And the second shall rise, not from the tomb, but from among the living, bearing his voice and not his face. He didn't know what it meant, until he received the call. It was from a doctor at a small hospital in Nazareth. A patient had come in that morning, a young man who had been missing for 2 years. He had been found wandering in the desert, barefoot, silent, eyes wide open but unblinking. When they brought him in, he spoke a single sentence in flawless Aramaic. "He is the first, but I am the second." Then he went quiet again. His fingerprints didn't match any record. His clothes were torn, ancient in design. And when they examined his body under a blacklight, faint patterns appeared, symbols that matched those found in the tomb. Layla, still trapped within the twisting passages, reached what looked like a small antechamber. There was something inside it, something new. Another stone slab, slightly smaller than the first. Atop it sat a second tablet. She stepped closer, and as she did, the red glow faded into a pale white light. This tablet had no carvings. Just one word burned into its center, pulsing gently. "Return." But before she could touch it, she heard footsteps. Not behind her. In front of her. Slow, steady, coming from deeper within the chamber. She froze, breath shallow, her heart pounding in her ears. The light flickered again, and for a split second she saw a silhouette, a tall figure cloaked in white, with something wrapped around its head. It didn't speak. It didn't move toward her. Just stood there watching. And then, just as suddenly, it was gone. Layla stumbled backward, gasping for air. This wasn't just about the tomb anymore. There were layers to this mystery, and someone or something was orchestrating them. She realized then that the tomb was only the first gate. There were others. Possibly dozens. Meanwhile, Professor Roshan had flown in from London. He couldn't stay away after decoding what he believed to be the third phase of the tablet's message. He met with Father Elias and showed him the reconstructed text. It wasn't just a timeline. It was a map. And at the center of that map was Jerusalem, but with 3 expanding rings like ripples in a pond. Each ring represented a phase. The final one, the outermost, was labeled with a single phrase in ancient script. "The gathering." Elias stared at the parchment. "A gathering of what?" he whispered. Roshan's answer was barely a breath. "The ones who never left." Across the globe, other strange events began to unfold. In southern Italy, a team of marine researchers stumbled upon an underwater cave sealed with similar carvings. In Ethiopia, an ancient church long thought to be abandoned began tolling its bells on its own. And in Egypt, archaeologists at Saqqara opened a sealed chamber beneath the step pyramid. Inside, they found a mural matching the exact same figure that Layla had dreamed about. But it wasn't just dreams anymore. People were starting to see things in their waking hours. Shadows moving against the direction of light, figures standing in doorways only to vanish when approached, whispers heard through radios and static. Reports poured in from priests, monks, scholars, even those without faith. All of them describing the same overwhelming feeling. We are not alone. Something ancient is returning. Layla finally found her way out of the tomb as the sun was rising. The guards were waiting outside, confused and visibly shaken. They said they had searched for her, but the tunnel had gone dark, completely vanished, for nearly 40 minutes. No sound, no trace. And then, suddenly, the entrance reappeared as if nothing had happened. She didn't tell them what she saw. Not yet. As she walked away from the site, something else caught her eye. A man in the distance, dressed in white, standing completely still on a rooftop, just watching. She blinked. He was gone. That night, the sky split open, not with light but with silence. Everything went still. Birds stopped singing. Dogs stopped barking. Radios lost signal. And somewhere in the vast quiet, the sound of stone scraping against stone echoed. Not from below, but from above. And in that same moment across the world, 12 clocks stopped at the exact same time. Midnight. The second seal had broken. Layla stood in the center of the stone plaza near the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, staring at the sky. Midnight had passed. Yet the world hadn't returned to normal. The stars seemed dimmer. The air felt heavy, charged with something unexplainable. People around her moved slowly, like they too were caught in a strange dream. But Layla wasn't dreaming. Everything she had witnessed, the glowing tablet, the shifting tomb, the visions, had led to this moment. And now she wasn't alone. Father Elias appeared beside her, breathless and pale. He held out his phone, showing her a message from Professor Roshan. The final piece of the puzzle had just been decoded. It wasn't just a prophecy. It was a warning. One final phrase had been hidden under the map's central ring, and it read, "When the tomb reopens, so shall the gate." Layla's heart pounded. What gate? Roshan's voice crackled through on speaker. Not a physical one. A spiritual divide. Between what we call heaven and everything else. The tomb wasn't just a burial site. It was a seal. Before she could respond, the ground beneath them began to tremble. Soft at first, then stronger. The bells rang again, but this time in a rhythm. Not chaotic, not random. Sounded like a pattern, like a code. Windows shattered nearby. A burst of wind tore through the courtyard. Then the clouds above twisted into a spiral, glowing faintly with that same deep red. Layla looked at Father Elias. "It's happening, isn't it?" He didn't answer. Instead, he pointed behind her. At the entrance of the old church, a blinding light emerged. Slowly, a figure stepped out from the shadows, draped in white robes, barefoot, with a calmness that felt both terrifying and beautiful. The people who were gathered began to fall silent. Some dropped to their knees. Others simply watched, unsure whether to feel awe or fear. Layla took a step forward. Her body trembled, but something inside her urged her on. The figure moved closer until they stood face to face. His eyes were unlike anything she had ever seen, ancient, kind, and sorrowful all at once. He raised one hand and touched her shoulder. The moment he did, Layla was flooded with visions, not of destruction but of memories. Moments from thousands of years ago. Burial, sealing, promise. She saw a group of cloaked figures placing the first tablet inside the tomb, whispering prayers in a lost language. Then, one of them turned and looked directly at her, as if he saw her standing there across time. She gasped and stepped back. The figure before her nodded, then turned to face the gathering crowd. "The seal is broken," he said softly, his voice calm but full of weight. "But not all is lost." Before anyone could react, the ground cracked open behind him. Dust and light shot into the air like a geyser. And from that tear in the earth, another presence emerged. But this one didn't bring calm. It brought cold. Darkness spilled from the crack. Not black, but something deeper, emptier. Another figure stepped forward, taller, cloaked in gray, face obscured. The temperature dropped instantly. Layla felt it in her bones. This This was what the seal had kept away. People began to panic, backing away. Some shouted, others cried. But the figure in white stood firm, unmoved. The two forces faced each other, silence stretching between them like a tight rope. Father Elias whispered, "This is the real battle. Not war, not violence, but presence. Light versus what was cast out." Layla understood now. The tomb wasn't just a sacred site. It had been a lock, a final safeguard. But time had worn it down, and humanity's thirst for discovery had pulled the last pin free. The two figures raised their hands at the same time. The light grew brighter. The shadow grew thicker. And then, it stopped. In that moment of perfect tension, a sound broke through. Not the wind. Not the bells. It was a voice, a child's voice. Layla turned toward it. A small boy stood at the edge of the crowd, clutching the second tablet. She recognized him instantly. The boy from Istanbul. The one who had spoken the phrase. Dust. Like, return. He walked forward slowly, completely unharmed by the swirling storm around them. The crowd parted for him. He walked between the two great figures and held the tablet up. "It's time," he said. But not like before. The tablet glowed, not red, not white, but gold. Pure, steady light. As it grew brighter, the shadow figure began to tremble, its form flickering like smoke caught in wind. The ground began to heal. The air grew warmer. And one by one, the strange symbols carved into walls and stones began to fade. Then, in the most unexpected twist of all, the figure in gray stepped back and bowed. The boy turned to the crowd. "It was never about fear," he said. "The gate didn't open to let something in. It opened to remind us what was kept out." And just like that, both figures vanished. The sky cleared. The bells fell silent. Layla stood frozen, barely able to breathe. Father Elias leaned on her shoulder, eyes wet with tears. "I don't think we'll ever fully understand what we witnessed," he whispered. "But I think we were meant to see it." People began to talk again, slowly returning to themselves. No one quite knew what to say. The world didn't end, but something deep inside it had changed. As dawn broke, Layla looked down at the spot where the crack had opened. All that remained was a single feather, pure white, still warm to the touch. She picked it up, turned it over in her hand, and smiled, knowing that while the tomb had been opened, something even greater had been set free. As the sun rose over Jerusalem, painting the stones of the old city with soft golden light, the world felt different. Not in a loud, obvious way, but in the quiet stillness, in the way people looked at each other, in the air that carried something new. The chaos of the night had passed, and what remained was peace, unexpected and humbling. Layla sat on the steps of the church, holding the white feather gently in her hand. She turned it over again and again, not because she didn't believe what had happened, but because she still couldn't fully understand it. Father Elias sat beside her, his robe dusty and torn at the edges. He hadn't spoken much since the figures vanished. There was a weight in his silence, but also calm. After a long pause, he finally said, "For 2,000 years, people have searched for signs, miracles, proof. And now that something has been shown, maybe the real challenge is what we do with it." Layla looked out across the courtyard, where people were slowly beginning to gather again. Tourists, pilgrims, locals, all of them speaking in hushed voices, with the same wide-eyed wonder she felt inside. "Do you think anyone will believe it?" she asked. "They don't have to," Elias said softly. "Some truths aren't proven by showing. They're lived." News had already started to spread. Not through official channels. Most networks didn't know what to say. The footage from the previous night had been scrambled, almost all of it filled with static or blank screens. But word of mouth traveled fast. People in Italy, Egypt, and Ethiopia all reported similar experiences. Bells ringing on their own. Strange weather. Visions. And in each place, someone had seen the same child. The boy with the golden light. Back in Istanbul, Professor Roshan had returned to his small flat. He sat surrounded by books and scrolls, but he didn't feel the usual pull to study. Instead, he picked up the old sketch of the map with the 3 rings and looked at the center. He had spent his life searching for facts, dates, physical evidence. But after what he'd seen, he realized something deeper had been calling to him all along. Faith didn't always require proof. It needed humility. Across the world, the boy reappeared. Quietly. Silently. Sometimes just for a moment, sometimes long enough to speak a single phrase. Remember the light. Those who saw him didn't forget. He appeared to a farmer in Brazil, a nurse in Tokyo, a lost teenager in Los Angeles. And each time they felt the same thing, peace followed by purpose. As if they were being reminded of something they already knew but had buried under life's noise. Layla eventually returned to her quiet home just outside the city. She didn't write a book or give interviews. She kept the feather in a small glass box on her shelf and went on with her life, though something inside her had shifted permanently. At night, she would sometimes wake up thinking she heard that rhythm again, the bells echoing in patterns. And though it faded quickly, she no longer feared it. Whatever the gate had been, it was closed now. Not locked, but understood. Father Elias stayed at the monastery, returning to his work. But he no longer read the scriptures the same way. The words felt new, alive. He started writing again, not sermons or theological papers but letters. Letters to people who had once reached out to him in doubt. To friends he had lost touch with. Even to himself. He wanted to remind others that the sacred isn't always distant. Sometimes it's just waiting to be seen with open eyes. One day, months later, Layla received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a small leather-bound notebook. The first page held only one sentence in Roshan's handwriting. There are still 2 more rings. Her fingers trembled slightly as she turned the page. Sketches. Fragments of ancient writings she hadn't seen before. It wasn't over. Not entirely. The tomb had been one gate. But if there were more, what would they reveal? She didn't feel fear this time, just readiness. And then, tucked into the back of the notebook, was a photograph. Black and white. Blurry. But clearly showing the boy, standing in a field somewhere under a sky filled with stars. His hand raised, pointing not to the ground, but upward. Layla smiled softly and placed the notebook beside the feather. Some stories don't end. They just change shape. In time, scholars debated what really happened. Some called it a mass hallucination. Others claimed it was a rare atmospheric event. But for those who were there, for those who felt it, no explanation was needed. Something sacred had been touched. And whatever had been unlocked in those moments now lived quietly inside them. Years later, children would ask their parents, "Did it really happen?" And the parents would pause, smile and say, "Let me tell you what I saw." The tomb that had once been sealed for 2,000 years now stood open, but not as a warning, as a reminder that the divine isn't buried in stone or locked behind gates. It walks among us. It watches in silence. And when the time is right, it returns, not to frighten us but to wake us up. And so, the story of the tomb came to a close. Not with fear, but with faith. Not with endings, but with invitations. Because sometimes, the most powerful discovery isn't what lies beneath ancient stone, but what awakens in the human heart when we finally choose to believe.